Caleb Sterling threw his mother's wedding ring into the sagebrush like it was poison. 16 years he'd kept it. 16 years waiting for a woman who wanted him, not his land, not his horses, not the empire he'd built from grief and grit. Every woman in Wyoming had tried. Every single one had failed. He was done waiting. 3 miles away, a woman with blood on her sleeve and secrets in her eyes was about to shatter everything he thought he knew about trust love and the lies families tell to protect the ones they love. Subscribe and turn on notifications because this story has more twists than a Wyoming mountain road, and you won't want to miss how a broken cowboy and a runaway heiress brought down an empire built on murder. Drop a comment telling me where you were watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. I'd rather die free than live as your prisoner. When a runaway heiress met a broken rancher, Caleb Sterling threw his mother's wedding ring into the sagebrush like it was poison. 16 years he'd kept it. 16 years of polishing the gold every Sunday morning until it caught the light the way it had when his mother stirred the evening stew. 16 years of remembering how his father would kiss her hand every dawn like she was still the young bride he'd married in Pennsylvania before they'd come west to chase a dream that ended in blood. The ring landed in the dust of the ranch yard and sat there catching the July morning sun like a promise he'd never been fool enough to make. Caleb turned his back and headed toward the barn. He didn't know that 3 miles away, a woman with blood on her sleeve was about to change everything. "You're going to regret that." Caleb didn't turn around. He knew his brother's voice like he knew the sound of his own breathing. "Stay out of it, Nathan." Nathan Sterling, 29 years old and still acting like consequences were suggestions, walked up beside him and bent down to pluck the ring from the dirt. He brushed off the dust with his thumb, careful like their mother's memory deserved better than Wyoming soil. "Ma would tan your hide if she saw you treating her ring like trash." "Ma's daddy's." The words came out flat. Caleb had stopped softening the truth years ago. "Don't mean she ain't watching." Nathan tucked the ring into his vest pocket. "I'm holding on to this until you come to your senses." "My senses are fine." "Your senses are broken, brother. Have been for 16 years. Nathan's voice lost its usual easy charm. "What happened this time? Let me guess, the governor's daughter." Caleb's jaw tightened. Margaret Reynolds, 23 years old, educated back east, pretty enough to stop traffic on Main Street. She'd batted her eyelashes over Sunday dinner and asked as her first question how many acres the Sterling Ranch covered. She was curious, Nathan offered. She was calculating. There's a difference. Caleb kept walking. The barn rose before him, solid and real, smelling of hay and horse sweat and honest work. This he understood. Animals didn't lie. They didn't measure your worth by your land holdings. They either trusted you or they didn't, and if they didn't, it was because you'd earned their suspicion. His prize stallion, a black Morgan named Midnight, nickered softly as Caleb approached. "At least you're honest about what you want," Caleb murmured, pulling an apple from his pocket. "Food and freedom. Simple." The horse took the apple with velvet lips, and Caleb allowed himself something that wasn't quite a smile. This was enough. It had to be enough. The ranch, the horses, the work that kept his hands busy, and his mind from wandering into territory that only led to disappointment. He didn't need a wife, didn't need children, didn't need anyone looking at him with expectations he couldn't meet. He'd tried that once, nearly destroyed him. "Mr. Sterling," Caleb turned to find Rio Mendoza standing in the barn doorway, hat in hand. His foreman had worked the ranch for 9 years, ever since Caleb had found him half dead from fever on the road to Denver. Rio was the closest thing Caleb had to a friend, which meant they rarely spoke about anything deeper than horses and weather. "What is it?" "There's been an accident on the North Road. Stagecoach overturned at Red Creek Crossing." Rio's weathered face was serious. "Sheriff's asking for men to help clear the road. Thought you'd want to know since you're heading to town for supplies anyway." Caleb nodded slowly. He didn't particularly want to go to town. Town meant people, and people meant questions about why he wasn't married yet, when he was going to settle down. Whether he'd heard about the new school teacher from Boston, who was just lovely and would make someone a wonderful wife. But duty was duty. A man didn't turn his back on folks in need, even if those folks would spend the next month gossiping about him over their fence lines. "Saddle my horse," Caleb said. "I'll head out now." The ride to Red Creek Crossing took 40 minutes at a steady pace. Caleb could have pushed faster, but there was no point exhausting his horse for what was probably nothing more than a broken axle and scattered luggage. The summer heat pressed down like a wool blanket. He tugged his hat lower to shade his eyes from the midday glare. He heard the commotion before he saw it. Men shouting, horses whinnying, the creak and groan of wood being moved. When he crested the hill overlooking the crossing, he pulled his horse to a stop. The stagecoach lay on its side like a wounded animal, one wheel still spinning lazily in the air. Three men were working to right it while the driver sat on a rock holding a bloody cloth to his head. And standing apart from the group, arguing with Deputy Wilson, was a woman. She wore a blue traveling dress, now dusty and torn at the hem. Dark hair had come loose from its pins, hanging in tangled waves around a face that was too angular to be conventionally pretty, nose slightly too long, mouth slightly too wide, cheekbones sharp enough to cut. But there was something in the way she held herself spine straight and chin lifted that made it impossible to look away. "I told you I don't need a doctor," she was saying as Caleb rode closer. "I need my trunk. There are medical supplies inside." "Ma'am, you're bleeding. And I'm a doctor's daughter. I know when I'm bleeding, and I know this is nothing more than a scratch." Her voice was steady, but Caleb caught the slight tremor beneath the words. "What I also know is that the driver has a possible concussion, and that man over there," she pointed to one of the workers, "is favoring his left leg in a way that suggests a sprained ankle at minimum. So instead of arguing with me about whether I need to sit down, perhaps you could help me retrieve my supplies so I can actually be useful." Deputy Wilson's face reddened. "Now see here, Miss..." "It's Ms., actually, She stopped, pressed her lips together. "Never mind what it is, the point remains." Caleb dismounted without consciously deciding to. There was something about this woman that caught his attention, though he couldn't say what. She wasn't beautiful in any conventional sense, but the way she stood there terrified and hiding it behind a wall of competence and sharp words, he understood walls. He'd built enough of his own. "The lady asked for her trunk," Caleb heard himself say. "Where is it?" Deputy Wilson turned relief and irritation warring on his face. "Mr. Sterling, didn't see you ride up." "Clearly. The trunk. We haven't had time to sort through the luggage yet. The coach. I'll find it myself." The woman turned to Caleb, and up close he could see her eyes were the color of honey in sunlight. There was a bruise forming on her left cheekbone that made something in his chest tighten with an emotion he refused to name. "What does it look like?" She blinked momentarily, thrown off balance by his directness. "Brown leather, brass fittings, my father's initials on the lid, H.W." Caleb nodded and walked toward the overturned coach without another word. The men had managed to right it partially, creating enough space to access the luggage compartment. He found the trunk she'd described wedged behind a hat box and a carpet bag and hauled it out with more care than he usually afforded anyone's belongings. When he carried it back to her, she was already kneeling beside the driver, examining his head wound with gentle, competent fingers. "It's not as bad as it looks," she was telling him. "Head wounds bleed heavily. You'll have a headache for a few days, but you'll live." She looked up as Caleb set the trunk beside her. "Thank you." "You're welcome." She opened the trunk and Caleb caught a glimpse of neatly organized medical supplies, bandages, bottles of various liquids, instruments he didn't recognize. She worked quickly, cleaning the driver's wound and wrapping it with practiced efficiency. "You really are a doctor's daughter," Caleb said. "Was." She didn't look up from her work. "He died 6 months ago?" "I'm sorry." "So am I." She moved to the man with the injured ankle next, and Caleb found himself following her like a lost dog. He told himself it was because he wanted to make sure she didn't collapse. That cut on her arm was still bleeding, soaking through her sleeve in a way that concerned him. But the truth was something more uncomfortable. He couldn't stop watching her. The way she spoke to the injured man, firm but kind. The way her hands moved with sure confidence despite the tremor he'd noticed earlier. The way she didn't ask for help, didn't expect it, just did what needed to be done. When she finally finished, she sat back on her heels and pressed a hand to her forehead. The movement made her wince. "Your turn," Caleb said. She looked up at him. "Excuse me? Your arm, let me see it." "It's fine. It's still bleeding." "I'm aware." "Then you're aware you need to let someone look at it." I can look at it myself. With what your other arm's too short to reach. She stared at him for a long moment, and Caleb saw something flicker in those honey-colored eyes. Suspicion, maybe, or calculation. The same look he'd seen in 100 women who saw him as a means to an end. But no, that wasn't quite right. This was different. This was the look of someone who'd been burned and wasn't eager to touch fire again. He understood that look too. I'm not going to hurt you, he said quietly. I'm not going to expect anything in return. I'm just offering to help because you need it, and I'm here. She let out a breath that might have been a laugh if it had any humor in it. You don't even know my name. Don't need to know your name to see you're bleeding. Another long pause. Then slowly she extended her arm. The cut was deeper than he'd expected, running along her forearm in a jagged line that would definitely scar. He cleaned it with water from his canteen and bandaged it with supplies from her own trunk, working as gently as he knew how. Elena, she said quietly. He looked up. What? My name, Elena Whitmore. Most people call me Elena. Caleb Sterling. I know who you are, he frowned. How? The deputy called you Mr. Sterling, and you don't look like anyone's deputy. That means you're someone important enough to be recognized by title alone. She gestured vaguely at his clothes, his horse, the quality of his boots. Wealthy but not soft. Rancher probably. The largest spread around here belongs to a man named Sterling. So either you're him or you're his brother. Caleb felt an unexpected smile tug at the corner of his mouth. You always this observant? My father taught me to pay attention. He said observation was half of diagnosis. Smart man. The smartest I ever knew. Caleb finished tying off the bandage and released her arm. Their eyes met, and for a moment neither of them spoke. There was something here, something unexpected and unwelcome and impossible to ignore. Where are you headed? Caleb asked, because he needed to fill the silence with something other than the tension crackling between them. Silver Ridge. I was hoping to find work. What kind of work? Any kind. She stood brushing dust from her skirt with her uninjured hand. I can cook, clean, keep books. I have medical training, though no official credentials. I'm not afraid of hard labor. What you are is desperate. She flinched as if he'd slapped her. I prefer determined. Desperate people make dangerous decisions, and judgmental people make poor first impressions. Caleb blinked. He couldn't remember the last time someone had snapped back at him like that. Most people either tiptoed around him because of his wealth or avoided him entirely because of his reputation for coldness. This woman did neither. She stood before him, battered and bleeding and alone, and she met his eyes without flinching. You're right, he said. That was out of line. I apologize. Now it was her turn to blink. You apologize? I'm capable of admitting when I'm wrong. That's rare in a man. So I've been told. Deputy Wilson approached, interrupting whatever might have come next. Miss Whitmore, the stage will be delayed at least until tomorrow. We need to get the wheel repaired. There's a boarding house in town where you can stay. I don't have money for a boarding house. Caleb spoke before he could stop himself. I'll cover it. Elena's eyes snapped to his face. No, it's not charity. Consider it payment for services rendered. You helped my men today. They're not your men. One of them is, Rio there with the ankle. He works my ranch. You patched him up. That's worth a night's lodging. I don't accept payment for medical care. Then accept it as a loan. Pay me back when you find work. She studied him with those sharp honey eyes, and Caleb knew she was trying to find the angle. The catch. The hidden expectation that would reveal his true motives. She wouldn't find one because there wasn't one. He didn't know why he was helping her. He didn't help people. He kept to himself, minded his own business, and avoided entanglements of any kind. But something about Elena Whitmore had gotten under his skin in a way he couldn't explain and didn't particularly want to examine. Fine, she said finally. A loan. I'll pay you back with interest. No interest. Interest or nothing. You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met. Good. Then we understand each other. She turned and walked toward the salvaged luggage, leaving Caleb standing there feeling like a fool. Nathan would laugh himself sick if he could see this. The great Caleb Sterling, brought up short by a woman with a bleeding arm and a tongue sharp enough to cut glass. He should walk away. He should get on his horse ride into town, buy his supplies, and forget he ever met her. In a week, she'd find work or move on or do whatever desperate women did, and he'd never see her again. That would be the smart thing, the safe thing. Caleb watched Elena Whitmore struggle to lift her trunk with one good arm, watched her refuse help from two men who offered, watched her finally accept assistance only when it became clear she couldn't manage alone. And he knew with a certainty that settled into his bones like winter cold that walking away wasn't an option anymore. The boarding house in Silver Ridge was run by a widow named Martha Crowley. She was 58 years old, sharp as a tack, and had a reputation for asking no questions as long as you paid your bill and didn't cause trouble. Caleb led Elena there himself, ignoring the curious looks from townspeople who had never seen him escort a woman anywhere. 2 weeks, he told Martha, pressing money into her tent, room and board, and don't let her pay you back. She'll try. Martha's eyebrows rose nearly to her hairline. Caleb Sterling playing benefactor. Never thought I'd see the day. Don't make more of it than it is. Wouldn't dream of it. Elena had already disappeared upstairs with her trunk refusing help carrying it despite the obvious strain on her injured arm. Caleb stood in Martha's parlor feeling foolish and exposed and entirely uncertain why he'd come this far instead of just giving directions and riding away. She's running from something, Martha said quietly. Caleb looked at her. How do you know? Been running a boarding house for 20 years. You learn to recognize the signs. She lowered her voice. Saw a man asking about a woman matching her description in Hillbrook last week. Well-dressed Eastern accent. Not the kind of man who takes no for an answer. Caleb's hands curled into fists at his sides. If anyone comes asking about her, I don't know nothing about nobody who stays under my roof. Martha smiled grimly. That's my policy, and I ain't about to change it for some fancy man from back east. Caleb nodded slowly. He should leave now. Go back to his ranch, his horses, his carefully constructed solitude. Whatever trouble Elena Whitmore was running from, it wasn't his problem. But he thought about the fear in her eyes, the way she'd flinched when he called her desperate, the tremor in her hands that she'd hidden so well. If she needs work, he heard himself say, send her to the ranch. I've got horses that could use someone with medical training. Martha's smile widened. Caleb Sterling, you old fool. Don't start. Wouldn't dream of it, but your mama's looking down right now, and I'll bet you anything she's laughing. Caleb left without responding because there was nothing to say. His mother probably was laughing. She'd always said his stubbornness would be his downfall. He just hadn't expected it to feel quite so much like salvation. 3 days later, Elena Whitmore arrived at the Sterling Ranch. She came in a borrowed wagon, her single trunk in the back, and a letter from Martha Crowley in her hand. The letter said she was a hard worker who didn't complain and didn't pry about the highest recommendation Martha ever gave anyone. Caleb met her in the yard, telling himself the flutter in his chest was just surprise. Mrs. Crowley said you might have work, Elena said without preamble. Might. Is that a yes or a no? It's a might, depends. On what? On whether you can actually do what you claim. Anyone can say they have medical training. Proving it's another matter. Her chin lifted. Show me a sick animal and I'll prove it. Caleb almost smiled. Almost. This way. He led her to the barn to a stall in the back where his second-best mare lay on fresh straw, breathing shallowly. The local veterinarian had come out twice and declared there was nothing to be done. The horse would either recover on her own or she wouldn't. Caleb had been sleeping in the barn for 3 nights, unwilling to let her die alone. Elena knelt beside the mare without hesitation, running her hands along the animal's sides, checking her eyes, her mouth, her hooves. Her movements were sure and competent, just as they'd been at the accident site. When did she stop eating? Elena asked. 4 days ago, Kamitina. And the veterinarian said what exactly? That it was some kind of infection, that there was nothing he could do. Elena made a sound that might have been contempt. Did he check her teeth? Her teeth. Horses can develop abscesses in their teeth just like humans. If untreated, the infection can spread and cause. She trailed off, her fingers probing the mare's jaw. The horse flinched. There, feel that swelling. Caleb crouched beside her and she guided his hand to a spot beneath the mare's jaw that was hot and hard to the touch. He felt like a fool for missing it. Can you fix it? He asked. I can try. I'll need to lance the abscess and drain it. It'll be messy and the horse won't like it, but if I'm right, she should start improving within a day or two. And if you're wrong, she met his eyes. She's no worse off than she was before. Caleb held her gaze for a long moment. There it was again, that directness, that refusal to make promises she couldn't keep. Every other person who'd offered to help with the mare had guaranteed results. Elena Whitmore guaranteed only effort. It was the most honest thing anyone had said to him in years. "Do it," he said. The next hour was exactly as messy as she had promised. The mare screamed and thrashed, and it took 3 men to hold her still while Elena worked. Blood and pus and worse things flowed from the incision. But Elena never flinched, never hesitated, never stopped talking in that low, steady voice that seemed to calm both the animal and the men holding her. When it was over, she sat back on her heels, covered in things Caleb didn't want to think about, and let out a long breath. "Now we wait," she said. "How long?" "2 hours. If she starts eating again, we're on the right track." Caleb nodded slowly. He looked at this woman, exhausted, filthy, kneeling in a barn next to a horse that might still die, and he felt something crack open in his chest. "You're hired," he said. Elena looked up at him. "Just like that. Just like that. Room and board, fair wages, and complete respectability. You'll have your own quarters. My brother and the ranch hands will treat you with respect, or they'll answer to me. And if the mare dies, then I tried. That's more than anyone else did." She was quiet for a long moment. Then slowly she stood. "There's something you should know before I accept." Caleb felt the familiar tension creep back into his shoulders. Here it came. The catch. The revelation. The reason she was too good to be true. "I'm being followed," she said quietly, "by a man who believes he owns me. He's dangerous and he's wealthy and he will eventually find me here. If you take me in, you're taking on that trouble too." Caleb waited for the fear to come. The instinct for self-preservation that should tell him to walk away, to protect himself, to maintain the careful distance that had kept him safe for 16 years. It didn't come. Instead, he felt something else entirely, something that felt dangerously like purpose. "What's his name?" he asked. "Dominic Ashford." "And what does he want?" Elena's honey eyes hardened. "He wants a wife who will give him access to her father's medical research and her family's connections. He wants a woman who will smile and nod and never question him. He wants ownership." She paused. "He doesn't want me. He wants what I represent." Caleb understood that. God help him, he understood it perfectly. "Welcome to the Sterling Ranch, Miss Whitmore," he said. "Let him come." The words hung in the summer air between them, heavy with promise and danger, and something neither of them was ready to name. 24 hours later, the mare ate her first meal in almost a week, and Caleb Sterling, who had spent 16 years building walls around his heart, felt the first stone begin to crumble. The first week passed like water through fingers. Elena worked from dawn until her hands ached, and then she worked some more. She tended the horses with a devotion that surprised even herself, learning their names and their temperaments, and the particular way each one liked to be touched. Midnight, Caleb's prize stallion took to her, immediately pressing his velvet nose against her palm whenever she passed his stall. The mare she'd saved, Bella the Hands called her, followed Elena around the barn like a lovesick puppy. "Never seen anything like it," Rio said one morning, watching Bella trail Elena to the water trough. "That horse wouldn't let anyone near her for 2 years after Mr. Sterling bought her. Now look at her." Elena smiled and said nothing. She understood Bella in a way she couldn't explain. They were both creatures who had learned to fear human hands, and they were both slowly, painfully learning to trust again. Caleb watched her. She felt his eyes on her constantly, though he rarely spoke more than necessary. He would appear in the barn doorway while she worked, arms crossed, face unreadable. He would pass her at meals and nod just once before retreating to his study. He would ride out at dawn and return at dusk, always alone, always silent. She didn't know what to make of him. The other men on the ranch were easy enough to understand. Rio was kind and quiet, still grateful for the way she'd tended his ankle. The younger hands were curious but respectful, keeping their distance, as Caleb had clearly instructed. Even Martha Crowley, who visited twice to check on her, was straightforward in her opinions and expectations. But Caleb Sterling was a locked door, and Elena couldn't find the key. "He wasn't always like this," Nathan told her one afternoon. Elena looked up from the bridle she was mending. Caleb's younger brother had made a habit of appearing whenever Caleb wasn't around, full of easy smiles and easier conversation. She didn't entirely trust him, but she didn't distrust him either. He was too open to be dangerous. Like what? She asked. Closed off. Cold. Nathan leaned against the fence, squinting into the summer sun. When we were kids, Caleb was the one who laughed loudest, the one who made friends with everyone. Ma used to say he had enough love in his heart for the whole territory. What changed? Nathan's smile faded. Our parents died. And then he stopped, shook his head. It ain't my story to tell. But there was a woman about 5 years after. Caleb thought she was different, thought she saw him for who he really was. Elena's hand stilled on the leather. What happened? She was engaged to a man back east the whole time. Rich fellow. She was just playing with Caleb, seeing if she could make the stone-hearted bachelor fall for her. Nathan's voice hardened. When he found out, something in him just died. He hasn't let anyone close since. Elena absorbed this information in silence. She thought about the way Caleb had looked at her that first day, measuring her for hidden motives. She thought about the careful distance he maintained, never touching her, rarely speaking to her, but always watching. He was waiting for her to reveal herself as a fraud, just like the woman before her. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Nathan grinned, and for a moment he looked exactly like the charming rogue the townspeople probably thought he was. Because I've seen the way he looks at you when you're not watching, and I've seen the way you look at him. He pushed off the fence. Someone's got to break through those walls of his. Might as well be someone who understands what it's like to build them. He walked away before she could respond. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. She lay in her small room off the kitchen, staring at the ceiling and listening to the sounds of the ranch settling into darkness. Somewhere outside, a horse nickered softly. The wind rustled through the grass. A coyote howled in the distance. She thought about Dominic. She thought about the last time she'd seen him standing in her father's study with that cold smile on his face. Her father had been dead for 3 days. The funeral was the next morning, and Dominic had come to inform her that the wedding would proceed as planned, that her father's debts would be forgiven as part of the arrangement, that she should be grateful for his generosity. She remembered the way his hand had closed around her wrist when she tried to refuse. The bruises had taken 2 weeks to fade. She'd run that same night, packed one trunk with everything she could carry, and slipped out the back door while Dominic dined with her father's colleagues, already dividing up the estate like vultures picking at a carcass. 3 months of running, 3 months of looking over her shoulder, 3 months of waiting for him to find her. And now she was here in a stranger's house, falling for a man who didn't trust her and probably never would. She was a fool. A soft knock at her door made her bolt upright, heart hammering. Miss Whitmore, Caleb's voice low and rough. You awake? She pulled on her robe and opened the door a crack. What is it? Midnight's acting strange. Won't let anyone near him. Thought you might. He trailed off, and even in the dim lamplight, she could see the discomfort on his face. Asking for help didn't come naturally to him. I'll come, she said. The barn was dark except for a single lantern hanging near Midnight's stall. The stallion was pacing, tossing his head, making sounds of distress that sent the other horses shifting nervously in their own enclosures. Started about an hour ago, Caleb said. I've tried everything. He usually calms down for me, but tonight, he shook his head. Alana approached the stall, slowly keeping her voice soft. Easy, boy. Easy. What's got you so worked up? Midnight's ears swiveled toward her. He stopped pacing, nostrils flaring. That's it, she murmured. That's it. Nothing to be afraid of. She opened the stall door and slipped inside. Caleb made a sound of protest, but she ignored him. Midnight stood trembling as she approached, his dark eyes rolling with fear. And then she saw it. There's a snake, she said quietly, in the corner. Don't move. Caleb went rigid. What kind? Oh, Anita, I can't tell in this light, but Midnight knows it's there. That's why he's panicking. I'll get a shovel. No, any sudden movement and it might strike. Elena kept her eyes on the coiled shape in the corner, barely visible in the shadows. I need you to open the back door of the stall. Slowly. Give Midnight an escape route. And what are you going to do? Keep it focused on me. Like hell you are. Caleb, She turned her head just enough to meet his eyes. Trust me. The word hung between them, heavy with meaning neither of them acknowledged. Caleb moved to the back of the stall. The door creaked as he eased it open. Midnight's ears pricked toward the sound. Go on, boy, Elena whispered. Go on. Get out of here. The stallion hesitated for one agonizing moment. Then he bolted through the open door and into the paddock beyond. The snake moved. Elena threw herself backward, hitting the stall wall hard enough to knock the breath from her lungs. The snake struck at empty air where she'd been standing, and before it could coil for another attack, Caleb was there with a pitchfork pinning it to the ground. Rattler, he said grimly. Big one. Elena slid down the wall until she was sitting in the hay, her legs suddenly unable to support her. Her hands were shaking. Her whole body was shaking. Caleb killed the snake with a single efficient motion, then dropped the pitchfork and crossed to where she sat. Are you hurt? She shook her head, not trusting her voice. Elena. His hand closed around her arm, gentle but firm. Look at me. She looked up. His face was closer than she'd expected, close enough to see the fear that still lingered in his gray eyes. Fear for her. I'm fine, she managed. Just give me a minute. Take all the time you need. He didn't let go of her arm. She didn't ask him to. They sat there in the hay, breathing together until the shaking stopped and the world settled back into something resembling normal. Thank you, Caleb said finally. For what? Almost getting yourself killed. For saving my horse, again. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. You're making a habit of it. Someone has to. He helped her to her feet, and for a moment they stood face to face in the dim lantern light. Elena became acutely aware of how little she was wearing, just her nightgown and robe, her hair lucid around her shoulders. She should feel vulnerable, exposed. Instead, she felt safe. You should get some sleep, Caleb said, his voice rougher than before. So should you. I will. I just need to check on Midnight first, make sure he's settled. She nodded and turned to go. She was halfway to the barn door when his voice stopped her. Elena. She looked back. Thank you, he said, for trusting me. In the stall, when you asked me to open the door, you trusted me to do it right. You did. I know, but you didn't know I would. You trusted me anyway. He paused. I'm not used to that. Neither am I, she thought, but she didn't say it. She just nodded and walked back to the house, feeling his eyes on her the whole way. Get to Sarah. The next morning, everything changed. Elena was hanging laundry when Nathan rode up at a gallop, his horse lathered with sweat. Where's Caleb? He demanded, barely waiting for the animal to stop before he was out of the saddle. In the north pasture. Why, what's wrong? Nathan's face was grim. There's a man in town, Eastern fellow, expensive suit, asking questions about a woman who arrived on the stagecoach 3 weeks ago. The world tilted sideways. He found me, Elena whispered. Not yet. Martha sent him off with some story about a woman matching your description heading to Denver. But he's not stupid. He'll figure out the truth soon enough. Nathan grabbed her shoulders. Elena, who is this man? What does he want? She couldn't answer. Her throat had closed up, her chest tight with a fear she'd been running from for 3 months. Elena. His name is Dominic Ashford, she heard herself say. He's the man I was supposed to marry, the man I ran from. Why did you run? The question unlocked something inside her. The words came pouring out, the engagement arranged by her father before his death, Dominic's true nature revealed only after the documents were signed, the bruises hidden beneath long sleeves and high collars, the night she'd fled with nothing but a trunk full of medical supplies and her father's research notes. He doesn't want me, she finished, her voice hollow. He wants my father's research. My father was working on something, a new treatment, a new technique. Dominic invested heavily in it. Without me, without the notes, he loses everything. Nathan's grip on her shoulders tightened. Does Caleb know? He knows someone is following me. He doesn't know the details. He needs to know. I can't. Elena, Nathan's voice was firm. My brother has spent 16 years building walls around himself because he doesn't trust anyone. You're the first person he's let anywhere close since, He stopped, shook his head. If you don't tell him the truth, all of it, he's going to find out some other way. And then those walls will go back up so fast, you'll never get through them again. She knew he was right. She'd known it from the beginning. But the thought of seeing Caleb's face when he learned the full extent of her troubles The danger she'd brought to his doorstep. "I'll leave," she said, "tonight before Dominic can trace me here, and go where run forever." Nathan released her shoulders. "Is that really what you want?" "No. God, no." She wanted to stay. She wanted this ranch, this life, this chance at something real. She wanted morning coffee with Caleb and late nights in the barn and the slow, careful building of trust that felt more precious than anything she'd ever known. She wanted him. The realization hit her like a physical blow. "I'll tell him," she said, "tonight. But Nathan, if he asks me to leave after, he won't." "How do you know?" Nathan's smile was sad and knowing. "Because I haven't seen my brother look at anyone the way he looks at you in 16 years. And if there's one thing Caleb Sterling doesn't do, it's give up on something he wants." That evening, Elena waited on the porch. She heard Caleb's horse before she saw him, the steady rhythm of hooves on packed earth. He appeared out of the gathering dusk like a ghost, tired and dust-covered and more handsome than any man had a right to be. "Elena," he dismounted, frowning. "What are you doing out here?" "Waiting for you." "Is something wrong with the horses?" "No, the horses are fine." She stood, wrapping her arms around herself, even though the evening was warm. "I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you from the beginning." Caleb's expression went carefully blank. She recognized that look. It was the same one he'd worn the day they met when he was measuring her for hidden motives. "Go on," he said. So she told him everything. The engagement, the abuse, the research, the money, Dominic's connections to powerful men in Washington, the lawyers who would back his claim if he ever found her, the certainty that he would never stop looking, not because he loved her, but because she represented an investment he refused to lose. Caleb listened without interrupting. His face revealed nothing, but she saw his hands curl into fists at his sides. She saw the muscle jumping in his jaw. When she finished, the silence stretched between them like a living thing. "Say something," she whispered. "What do you want me to say?" "I don't know, that you're angry, that you want me to leave, that you wish you'd never—" "I'm not angry at you." She blinked. "You're not—" "I'm angry at him." Caleb's voice was low and dangerous, nothing like the careful neutrality he usually maintained. "I'm angry at a man who put his hands on a woman, who would treat her like property, who would chase her across the country because she had the courage to refuse him. Caleb, I'm angry," he continued, "that you felt you couldn't tell me this from the start, that you thought I would blame you for running from a man who hurt you. I thought you would send me away." "Why? Because that's what everyone does." The words came out broken, sharp-edged with years of disappointment. "My father's colleagues, my friends, everyone who knew what Dominic was, what he did. They all looked the other way because he was wealthy and connected. And I was just a woman with no power and no protection." Caleb stepped closer, close enough that she could see the storm in his gray eyes, the barely contained fury that wasn't directed at her. "Do I look like the kind of man who looks the other way?" "No." "Then stop expecting me to." He reached up, and for one heart-stopping moment, Elena thought he was going to touch her face. Instead, his hand stopped just short, hovering in the air between them like a question. "I spent 16 years believing that everyone who got close to me wanted something," he said quietly. "My land, my money, my horses. I convinced myself it was safer to be alone than to risk being used again. I understand." "No, you don't. Not yet." His hand dropped to his side. "You're the first person who's ever looked at me like I'm just a man. Not a prize to be won or a conquest to be claimed. Just me. Do you have any idea how terrifying that is?" Elena's breath caught in her throat. "Yes, I know exactly how terrifying it is." "Good. Then you understand why I'm not going to let you run. Why I'm not going to ask you to leave." His jaw tightened. "Dominic Ashford can come. Let him come. But he's not taking you anywhere. Not as long as I have breath in my body. You don't owe me anything. This isn't about owing. This is about—" He stopped, frustrated, searching for words that didn't come easily. "This is about the fact that I haven't slept through the night in 16 years, and last night after you saved midnight, I slept like a dead man. This is about the fact that I catch myself looking for you every time I walk into a room. This is about the fact that you make me want things I stopped letting myself want a long time ago." Elena couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. Couldn't do anything but stare at this impossible man who was offering her something she'd never dared to hope for. I'm not asking for anything, Caleb said. I'm not expecting anything. I just need you to know that whatever comes next, you're not facing it alone. Not anymore. She should say something, something profound, something meaningful, something that matched the weight of what he'd just given her. Instead, she closed the distance between them and pressed her lips to his. It was a brief kiss, barely more than a brush of mouth against mouth, but it sent a shock through her entire body, a jolt of electricity that made her gasp. Caleb went absolutely still. She pulled back suddenly, terrified that she'd made a terrible mistake. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. His hand came up to cup her face, gentle as a whisper. Don't you dare apologize. And then he was kissing her, really kissing her, and the world fell away until there was nothing but the two of them in the summer night and the impossible, terrifying, wonderful feeling of finally being seen. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Caleb pressed his forehead against hers. Whatever happens next, he said, we face it together. Together, she agreed. In the distance, a coyote howled at the rising moon, and 3 miles away, in a hotel room in Silver Ridge, Dominic Ashford stared at a map of the surrounding ranches and smiled. He'd always enjoyed the hunt, and his prey was very, very close. The kiss changed everything and nothing. Caleb still rose before dawn. He still worked the ranch with the same relentless focus. He still spoke in short sentences and avoided unnecessary words. But now, when their eyes met across the breakfast table, something passed between them that made Elena's heart stutter. Now when he passed her in the barn, his hand would brush against hers just for a second, barely noticeable, and the touch would linger on her skin for hours. They didn't speak about what had happened on the porch. They didn't need to. Some things existed beyond words, but the knowledge of Dominic's presence in town hung over them like a storm cloud, darkening even the brightest moments. He's still at the hotel, Nathan reported 3 days after the kiss, asking questions, showing people a photograph. Elena's blood ran cold. A photograph. Your engagement portrait, from what I hear, the one that ran in the Boston papers. She remembered that portrait. Dominic had insisted on it, wanted the whole world to see his prize. She'd smiled for the camera while his hand gripped her arm hard enough to leave bruises. Has anyone told him where I am? Not yet. Martha's been spreading stories about you heading to California. Most folks don't want to get involved with Eastern money and Eastern problems. Nathan paused. But someone will talk eventually. They always do. Caleb had been silent throughout this exchange, his jaw tight and his eyes fixed on something only he could see. Then we need to be ready, he said finally. Ready for what? Elena asked. For whatever he tries next. That afternoon, Caleb did something he hadn't done in 16 years. He invited Elena into his study. The room was smaller than she'd expected, lined with books and cluttered with papers. A large desk dominated one wall, and above it hung a portrait of a couple she immediately recognized as Caleb's parents. They had the same gray eyes, the same strong jaw. My father built this ranch from nothing, Caleb said, following her gaze. He came west with $10 in a dream. By the time I was born, he owned more land than any man in the territory. He must have been remarkable. He was. Caleb moved to the desk and pulled open a drawer. He also kept meticulous records. Every transaction, every contract, every legal document. He taught me that a man's word might be his bond, but paper is what holds up in court. He withdrew a thick leather folder and set it on the desk. What is this? Elena asked. Insurance. Caleb opened the folder to reveal a stack of documents, land deeds, cattle contracts, bank statements. Everything that proves my ownership of this ranch is legal and uncontested. He looked up at her. Dominic Ashford is a businessman. He understands leverage. Right now, he thinks you're alone and unprotected, a woman with no resources and no allies. I am alone and unprotected. Not anymore. Caleb pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. I want to hire you officially as the ranch's veterinary specialist. A formal contract witnessed and filed with the county clerk. Elena frowned. Why? Because a contract makes you an employee with legal standing. It means Dominic can't simply claim you and drag you away. Any dispute would have to go through the courts, and courts take time. Time for us to find another way. Another way to what? Caleb's eyes met hers, to stop him, permanently. She stared at him. This man who had spent 16 years avoiding entanglements of any kind, now weaving himself into her troubles with methodical precision. "You've thought about this," she said. "I've done nothing but think about this since Nathan told me he was in town." "Why?" The question hung between them. Caleb set down his pen and walked around the desk until he stood directly in front of her. "Because 3 weeks ago I threw my mother's ring in the dirt," he said quietly. "I'd given up on love, on connection, on the possibility that anyone could want me for who I am rather than what I own. And then you walked into my life with blood on your sleeve and fire in your eyes, and you made me want things I'd stopped believing in. Caleb, I'm not good at this, at saying what I feel. I've spent too long building walls to know how to tear them down gracefully." He reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "But I know that I'm not willing to lose you. Not to Dominic, Ashford, not to fear, not to anything. So if you'll let me, I'm going to fight for you. Even if you think you don't deserve it. Even if you think it's not worth the trouble." "It's not about what I deserve," Elena's voice cracked. "It's about what you'll lose." "What will I lose?" "Everything. Dominic has connections to senators, to judges. He could destroy your reputation, challenge your land rights, make your life a living hell. Let him try. You don't understand. I understand perfectly." Caleb's hands came up to frame her face. "I understand that a man who hurts women is a coward. I understand that cowards rely on fear to maintain their power. And I understand that fear only works if you let it." His thumbs brushed away tears she hadn't realized she was crying. "I spent 16 years letting fear control me. I'm done. Are you?" She wanted to argue. Wanted to list all the reasons this was a terrible idea, all the ways it could go wrong, all the damage Dominic could inflict. But looking into Caleb's gray eyes, seeing the determination there, the absolute refusal to back down, she felt something shift inside her. Maybe she was done too. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, what?" "Okay, I'll sign your contract. Okay, I'll stay. Okay, I'll let you fight for me." She took a shaky breath. "But I'm fighting too. I'm not going to hide behind you and wait for someone else to save me." Caleb smiled a real smile, the kind that transformed his whole face. "I wouldn't expect anything less." He kissed her, then slow and deep, and for a few precious moments, the rest of the world ceased to exist. The contract was signed that evening with Nathan and Rio as witnesses. "Official and legal," Nathan declared, blotting the ink. "Miss Elena Whitmore, veterinary specialist employed by the Sterling Ranch. Salary, room and board." "It feels strange," Elena admitted, "signing a paper to prove I belong somewhere." "Paper doesn't prove anything," Caleb said. "It just makes it harder for people to pretend otherwise." The next morning, Dominic Ashford came to the ranch. Elena was in the barn when she heard the hoofbeats, 2 horses moving fast. She set down the brush she'd been using on Bella's coat and moved to the door, her heart already pounding. Caleb was crossing the yard from the main house, Nathan falling into step beside him. Their postures were casual, but Elena had learned to read them well enough to see the tension in their shoulders and the readiness in their stride. Dominic dismounted with the easy grace of a man accustomed to fine horses and finer things. He was exactly as she remembered, tall, silver-haired, handsome, in a cold, polished way. His companion was a younger man in a deputy's uniform, looking uncomfortable and out of his depth. "Mr. Sterling, I presume." Dominic's voice carried across the yard, smooth as silk. "I'm Dominic Ashford. I believe you have something that belongs to me." "This is private property," Caleb replied, his voice flat. "State your business or leave." My business is simple. I'm looking for my fiancée, a woman named Elena Whitmore. I have reason to believe she's been working here under false pretenses." Elena's nails dug into her palms. She wanted to run, wanted to hide, wanted to be anywhere but here. But Caleb's words echoed in her mind. Fear only works if you let it. She forced herself to step out of the barn and into the sunlight. "Hello, Dominic." His eyes found her immediately, and something flickered across his face, surprise perhaps, or satisfaction. The look of a hunter who had finally cornered his prey. "Elena, thank God." He started toward her. "I've been worried sick. When you disappeared—" "I didn't disappear. I left." "You were distraught. Your father's death, the stress of the arrangements, I understood. I forgave you. He was still moving, closing the distance between them. But it's time to come home now. We have a wedding to plan. Caleb stepped into his path. The lady said she left, Caleb said quietly. Seems to me that means she doesn't want to be found. She's not your fiancée, Caleb interrupted. She's my employee. Dominic laughed, a cold sound that made Elena's skin crawl. Employee, is that what she told you? He turned to the deputy. Did she also tell you about the engagement contract her father signed? The dowry he paid, the legal obligations she's running from. I told him everything, Elena said, including the parts you conveniently leave out. And what parts would those be? The bruises, the threats, the way you made sure I had nowhere to turn when my father died. Her voice shook, but she didn't look away. You don't want a wife, Dominic. You want a possession. Dominic's mask slipped for just a second, long enough for Elena to see the rage beneath, long enough for Caleb and Nathan to see it too. Elena, you're clearly confused, Dominic said, his voice tight with controlled anger. The grief has affected your mind. Deputy Wilson here can attest that I've come to bring you home for medical treatment. I'm a doctor's daughter. I don't need medical treatment. You need help, professional help. Dominic turned to the deputy. You see how she is paranoid, delusional, making wild accusations against the man who loves her? Deputy Wilson shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Ashford, maybe we should take her into protective custody for her own good. No, Caleb's voice cut through the air like a blade. You're not taking her anywhere. This isn't your concern, Mr. Sterling. She's my employee. That makes it my concern. An employment contract doesn't supersede an engagement contract. It does when the engagement was obtained through coercion and maintained through violence. Dominic's eyes narrowed. Be careful. You're making accusations you can't prove. Am I? Caleb reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded piece of paper. This is a letter from the physician who treated Elena's injuries after your last disagreement. Dr. Thomas Grant. He documented everything: bruises on her arms, her ribs, her throat. He was too afraid to report it while her father was alive, but he's willing to testify now. Elena's breath caught. She hadn't known about any letter, hadn't known Dr. Grant had documented anything. Dominic's face went pale beneath his tan. Where did you get that? Doesn't matter where I got it. What matters is where it'll end up if you don't turn around and ride out of here. You're bluffing. Try me. The silence stretched between them, thick with tension. Elena watched Dominic's face, watched him calculate odds and outcomes the way he calculated everything. Finally, he smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. Very well, Mr. Sterling, you've won this round. He stepped closer to Caleb, close enough that their faces were inches apart. But let me be clear. That woman is mine. She was promised to me, and I always collect what I'm owed. This isn't over. It won't be over until I have what belongs to me. She doesn't belong to you. She doesn't belong to anyone. We'll see. Dominic turned and mounted his horse. Enjoy your little victory while it lasts. I'll be back. And next time I won't be so polite. He rode away without looking back, the deputy trailing behind him. Elena's legs gave out. Caleb caught her before she hit the ground, his arms strong and steady around her. She buried her face in his chest and let the tears come, great heaving sobs that shook her whole body. It's okay, Caleb murmured into her hair. It's okay. He's gone. He'll come back. You heard him. He'll come back. Let him. Caleb pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. I meant what I said, Elena. I'm not letting him take you. Not today, not ever. The letter, she managed. How did you, Nathan? Caleb's mouth quirked. Turns out my little brother is better at investigation than I gave him credit for. He's been sending telegrams all week, tracking down anyone who might have information about Ashford's past. And Dr. Grant just sent a letter. Dr. Grant hated what Dominic did to you. He hated himself for staying silent. When Nathan contacted him, he jumped at the chance to help. Elena laughed, a wet, broken sound. I had no idea. You were too busy running to look back. But you've got people in your corner, Elena. More than you know. She wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe him. But she had seen Dominic's face when he made his threat. She knew that look. It was the same look he'd worn the night she ran, the look that said he would rather destroy something than let it go. This wasn't over. It was only beginning. That night, Caleb showed her the ring. They were sitting on the porch, watching the stars emerge one by one in the velvet sky. The tension of the day's confrontation still hummed in the air, but there was something else too, a fragile sense of hope that hadn't existed before. Nathan gave this back to me, Caleb said, pulling the small gold band from his pocket. After you arrived, he said I'd need it eventually. Elena stared at the ring, catching the lamplight from the window. Your mother's ring. My grandmother's, actually. My grandfather gave it to her when they were married back in Pennsylvania. She passed it down to my mother and my mother. He swallowed hard. My mother was wearing it the day she died. Caleb, you don't have to. I know I don't have to. I want to. He turned the ring over in his fingers. After my parents died, I swore I'd never give this ring to anyone who didn't deserve it, who didn't see me for who I really am. And you've been waiting 16 years, he finished. 16 years. He looked at her, his gray eyes reflecting the starlight. I think I was waiting for you. Caleb, I'm not proposing. Not yet. It's too soon and you've got enough to deal with without me adding pressure. He pressed the ring into her palm. But I want you to hold on to this, as a promise. When this is over, when Dominic is gone and you're safe, I'm going to ask you to marry me. And this ring will be part of that question. Elena's hand closed around the gold band. It was warm from his touch, small and perfect, and weighted with more meaning than she could comprehend. What if I say no, she whispered. Then you say no, and I'll respect that. But at least I'll have tried. He smiled that rare, beautiful smile that transformed his whole face. I'm done being afraid to try. She leaned into him, resting her head against his shoulder. I'm not afraid anymore either. Not with you. They sat there until the moon rose, two people who had been broken by life, learning how to be whole again. But the peace wouldn't last. At midnight, Nathan burst through the door with news that would change everything. The hotel, he gasped out of breath from running. Dominic's not there. Hasn't been since this afternoon. Caleb was on his feet instantly. Where did he go? I don't know, but I found something else, Nathan held up a telegram. He's been sending messages to someone in Denver, someone connected to the territorial government. What kind of messages? Legal motions, land disputes. Nathan's face was grim. He's not just coming after Elena anymore, Caleb. He's coming after the ranch. Elena's blood turned to ice. Dominic hadn't left. He'd been planning, and they had no idea what he was planning to do. The telegram changed everything. Caleb read it 3 times, his face growing darker with each pass. Nathan stood by the door, still breathing hard, while Elena clutched the ring in her palm like a lifeline. He's claiming my father stole his land, Caleb said finally, his voice flat with disbelief. Says the original survey was fraudulent, that the Sterling Ranch was built on property that rightfully belongs to the Ashford family. That's insane, Nathan exploded. Pa bought this land fair and square. We've got the deeds, the receipts, everything. Dominic knows that. He's not trying to win in court. Caleb set down the telegram. He's trying to tie us up in legal proceedings long enough to bleed us dry. Lawyers cost money. Court appearances cost time. If we're fighting to keep the ranch, we can't focus on protecting Elena. Elena felt sick. This is my fault. Don't. Caleb's voice was sharp. Don't you dare blame yourself for his evil. But if I hadn't come here, if you hadn't come here, I'd still be a bitter fool throwing my mother's ring in the dirt. Caleb crossed to her and took her hands. Dominic Ashford is doing this because he's a monster. That's not your fault. That's his nature. What do we do? Nathan asked. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was calm, but Elena could see the fury burning beneath. We find proof, real proof. Dominic's not as clean as he pretends to be. Nobody with that much money and that few scruples gets through life without leaving a trail. He looked at his brother. You've been digging into his past. Keep digging. There has to be something. And in the meantime, we prepare for war. The next 3 days were chaos. Caleb hired a lawyer from Denver, a sharp-eyed woman named Victoria Kane, who arrived on the afternoon stage with a trunk full of legal documents and a reputation for never losing a case. Dominic Ashford, she said, reviewing the papers Caleb had gathered. I know that name. His father made a fortune in textile manufacturing. Legal mostly, but there were always rumors. What kind of rumors? Elena asked. The kind that involved workers dying in unsafe conditions and families being paid to keep quiet. Victoria looked up. The son is supposedly worse. Smarter about hiding it, but worse. Can you prove any of that? Not yet, but I have contacts in Boston who owe me favors. If there's dirt on Dominic Ashford, I'll find it. Meanwhile, Nathan disappeared for 2 days on what he called research. He returned dusty and exhausted, but with a gleam in his eye that made Elena nervous. I found something, he announced, bursting into the kitchen where Caleb and Elena were having breakfast. Something big. What? Caleb set down his coffee. Dominic Ashford isn't Dominic Ashford. The silence that followed was deafening. Explain, Caleb said slowly. Nathan dropped into a chair, grinning like a man who had just found gold. I tracked down a clerk who used to work for Dominic's father. Old man retired to a cabin outside Hillbrook. He told me that Dominic's real name is Dominic Vale. Elena's heart stopped. What? Dominic Vale, son of a factory foreman who died in a fire at the Ashford textile mill. The original Dominic Ashford died of scarlet fever when he was 8 years old. Dominic's mother worked as a maid in the Ashford household. When the real Dominic died, old man Ashford was so grief-stricken that he adopted Dominic Vale and gave him his dead son's name. That doesn't make sense, Elena said. Why would he do that? Because Dominic was already living in the house, had been for years. Nathan's grin faded. The clerk thinks old man Ashford was Dominic's real father. An affair with the maid that produced a son he couldn't publicly acknowledge. When his legitimate heir died, he saw an opportunity. Caleb leaned back in his chair. So Dominic Ashford is actually an illegitimate child who inherited a fortune through deception. It gets better, or worse depending on how you look at it. Nathan pulled a crumpled paper from his pocket. The real Dominic Ashford had a sister. She married and had children before she died 10 years ago. Those children would be the legitimate heirs to the Ashford fortune if anyone could prove that their mother's brother died without a legal heir. And Dominic knows this, Caleb said. He has to. It's the only explanation for why he's so desperate to maintain control. Nathan looked at Elena. Your father's research, the connections he made, the reputation he built, Dominic needs all of that to solidify his position. Without you, he's vulnerable. Elena's mind raced. She thought about Dominic's obsessive need for control, his fury when she tried to leave his willingness to chase her across a continent. It had never been about love. It had barely even been about money. It had been about fear. He's afraid, she said slowly, afraid that someone will discover the truth. And that fear makes him dangerous, Caleb said grimly. A cornered animal is the most deadly kind. Wow. Victoria Kane was ecstatic when she heard the news. This is exactly what we needed, she said, pacing Caleb's study with barely contained energy. If we can prove that Dominic Ashford is actually Dominic Vale, his entire legal standing collapses. The land claim, the engagement contract, everything becomes fraudulent. How do we prove it? Caleb asked. We need documentation. Birth records, death records, anything that connects Dominic Vale to the Ashford household. Victoria stopped pacing. The clerk Nathan found would be a start, but his testimony alone won't be enough. We need paper. Paper that proves the real Dominic Ashford died and that Dominic Vale took his place. Where would that paper be? Boston, in the Ashford family records or the city archives. Victoria frowned. But accessing those records will be difficult. Dominic has powerful friends. If he suspects what we're looking for, he'll have everything sealed or destroyed. Then we don't let him suspect, Elena said. Everyone turned to look at her. Dominic thinks he's won, she continued. He thinks we're scrambling to defend against his land claim. He doesn't know we've discovered his secret. She took a deep breath. What if I go to him? Pretend I've changed my mind. While he's distracted with me, someone else can get to Boston and find the proof. Absolutely not, Caleb said immediately. It makes sense. I said no. His voice was hard, his eyes blazing. You're not going anywhere near that man. Caleb, listen to me. I've spent 3 weeks watching you heal, watching the fear slowly leave your eyes, watching you learn to trust again. He stepped closer, his voice dropping. I'm not sending you back to the man who broke you. I won't do it. Find another way. There might not be another way. Then we'll make one. The argument was interrupted by the sound of hoofbeats outside, lots of hoofbeats. Nathan moved to the window and went pale. Caleb, you need to see this. They crowded around the window. Outside, a group of men on horseback had gathered in the yard. At their head sat Dominic Ashford, flanked by a man in a federal marshal's uniform. Samuel Thornton, the marshal called out, I have a warrant for the arrest of Elena Whitmore on charges of theft and fraud. Surrender her immediately. Elena's knees buckled. Caleb caught her arm, steadying her. What theft? He demanded through the window. What fraud? She stole valuable research materials from the Ashford estate, research funded by Mr. Ashford and legally his property. The marshal held up a document. I have a sworn affidavit and a court order. This isn't a request, Mr. Sterling. It's a legal mandate. My father's research, Elena whispered. The notes I took when I fled. Dominic must have reported them as stolen. Did you take them? Caleb asked. They were my father's work, his life's work. Dominic had no right. She stopped seeing the look on Caleb's face. Yes, I took them, but they're not his property. They were never his property. Caleb's jaw tightened. He turned back to the window. I need to see that warrant. Come out and I'll show you. I'm not walking into an ambush. Send the marshal alone with the document. Your men stay where they are. A tense pause, then Dominic nodded and the marshal dismounted. Caleb met him at the door. The warrant was real. The charges were detailed. The court order was signed by a judge, and Elena recognized a man Dominic had bragged about controlling years ago. This is a setup, Caleb said quietly to the marshal. You have to know that. What I know is that I have a job to do. The marshal looked uncomfortable but determined. The lady can fight the charges in court. That's her right, but I have to take her into custody. And if I refuse to let her go, then I arrest you for obstruction, and my men take her anyway. The marshal's voice softened. Don't make this harder than it has to be, Miss Sterling. She'll get a fair trial. With Dominic Ashford's judge, that's not a trial, that's a lynching. Elena touched Caleb's arm. It's okay. It's not okay. It has to be. She stepped past him, facing the marshal with her chin high. I'll go with you peacefully. Lena, no. If you fight them, they'll arrest you too. Then who will find the proof? Who will clear my name? She forced a smile. Trust me, like I trusted you in the barn with the snake. Remember. His face crumpled for one agonizing moment. She saw beneath the walls, saw the terrified boy who had lost his parents, the wounded man who had been betrayed by everyone he let close. She saw how much it cost him to let her go. I'll find you, he said hoarsely. Whatever it takes, I'll find you, and I'll bring you home. I know you will. Dominic was smiling as the marshal led her toward the horses, that cold, satisfied smile that haunted her nightmares. Hello again, Elena, he said softly. I told you, I always collect what I'm owed. She didn't respond, didn't give him the satisfaction. But as she mounted the horse they provided, she looked back at Caleb, standing on the porch of his ranch, his hands clenched at his sides, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. And she made a decision. She would not let Dominic Ashford destroy the man she loved. Whatever it took, whatever she had to sacrifice, she would end this, even if it meant ending herself. The jail in Silver Ridge was small and clean, which was more than Elena had expected. The marshal, whose name she learned was Thomas Webb, seemed genuinely uncomfortable with the situation. I don't like this any more than you do, miss, he said as he locked her cell. But the law is the law. The law can be bought, Elena replied. Dominic Ashford proved that. Marshal Webb didn't argue. He just looked tired. That night, alone in her cell, Elena allowed herself to cry. Not for herself, she'd made her peace with whatever was coming, but for Caleb, for the hope she'd glimpsed in his eyes, the future they might have had. She cried for the ring still hidden in her pocket, warm against her thigh. The ring she couldn't bear to part with even now. She was still awake at midnight when she heard footsteps. Elena. Her head snapped up. Nathan stood on the other side of the bars dressed in dark clothes, a ring of keys in his hand. What are you doing here? Getting you out, he fumbled with the lock. Nathan, if you do this, you'll be fugitives, both of you. We'll be fugitives together. The lock clicked open. Come on, we don't have much time. Where's Caleb? Miller's Crossing, same place you first met. He's waiting with horses. They slipped out the back of the jailhouse into the dark streets of Silver Ridge. Elena's heart pounded so loud she was sure someone would hear it. Stay close. Stay quiet, Nathan whispered. They made it 2 blocks before Dominic stepped out of the shadows. I wondered if you'd try something like this, he said conversationally. He wasn't alone. 4 men flanked him, all armed. The marshal was very accommodating when I suggested additional security might be needed. Nathan pushed Elena behind him. Let her go, Ashford. That's not my name. Dominic's smile was razor sharp. But I suppose you knew that already. Your brother's been busy. We know everything, Nathan said. Your real identity, your father's deception, the legitimate heirs you've been hiding from. It's over. Is it? Dominic moved closer. Tell me, Mr. Sterling, did you find any proof, any documentation, any evidence that would hold up in court? Nathan hesitated. I thought not. Dominic gestured to his men. Take her. Kill him. No, Elena screamed. Everything happened at once. Nathan drew his gun. Dominic's men drew theirs. Shots exploded in the darkness, muzzle flashes lighting up the night like lightning. Nathan fell. Elena dropped to her knees beside him. Blood spread across his shirt, dark and terrible. His eyes were wide with shock. Nathan! Nathan, look at me! Elena! His voice was weak. Run! You have to run! I'm not leaving you! Tell Caleb, he coughed and blood bubbled at his lips. Tell him I'm sorry. For everything, tell him. His hand went limp in hers. No. The word tore out of her like a scream. No, no, no. Dominic's men grabbed her arms, dragging her away from Nathan's body. She fought like a wild thing, scratching, biting, kicking. It didn't matter. There were too many of them. Such drama, Dominic said, watching her struggle. Your father was the same way, passionate to the end. The words cut through her grief like a blade. What did you say? Did you really think your father died of natural causes? Dominic leaned close enough that she could smell his cologne, see the madness dancing in his eyes. He was going to cut me out of the research, going to take everything I'd invested and give it to some university. I couldn't allow that. You killed him. I expedited his passing. Heart attacks are so common in men his age. Dominic shrugged. Just like tragic accidents happen to people who ask too many questions. Your new friends, for instance. Horror washed through her. You're going to kill Caleb. I'm going to take everything he has, his ranch, his reputation, his brother's life. Dominic's smile widened. And then I'm going to make you watch while I destroy everything he ever cared about. That's the price for humiliating me, Elena. That's what happens when you run. She stopped struggling, stopped fighting. Let her body go limp in the grip of Dominic's men. You're right, she said quietly. Dominic's eyebrows rose. I beg your pardon. You're right. I can't beat you. I can't escape you. I can't protect anyone from you. She lifted her eyes to his. But I can tell you where the proof is, the documentation that exposes who you really are. I can give you that, and you can destroy it, and this can all be over. Why would you do that? Because I'm tired of running. I'm tired of watching people die for me. Her voice cracked. I just want it to stop. Please, just make it stop. Dominic studied her for a long moment. She could see him calculating, weighing the risks and rewards. Where? He finally asked. What, here? I'll show you. But you have to promise, you have to swear that you'll leave Caleb alone. That once you have what you want, you'll go back to Boston and never touch him or his ranch. You're in no position to bargain. Then kill me. Kill me right here and never find out where those documents are. Because I'm the only one who knows Dominic. I'm the only one who can save you. The lie came easily. She had no idea where the proof was, didn't even know if it existed. But she saw the flicker of doubt in Dominic's eyes, the fear that had driven him for so long. He believed her. Very well, he said. Show me. She led them into the darkness, away from Nathan's body, away from any hope of rescue. But as they walked, she slipped her hand into her pocket and felt the cool metal of Caleb's mother's ring. She had a plan. It was a terrible plan, and it would probably get her killed. But it was all she had. They stopped at an old mine shaft outside of town, abandoned for years, and supposedly haunted by the ghosts of miners who died in a collapse. "It's in there," Elena said, pointing to the entrance. "My father hid copies of his research in a safety box. He was paranoid about his work being stolen. He told me about this place before he died." Dominic's eyes narrowed. "You expect me to believe he hid important documents in an abandoned mine? I expect you to believe he was dying and afraid and desperate to protect his life's work from the man who was killing him." Elena's voice was steady despite the terror clawing at her chest. "You want the proof, it's inside. Go get it yourself. I'm not a fool. You first." "Fine." She walked into the darkness without hesitation. Dominic followed, a lantern in one hand and a pistol in the other. His men stayed at the entrance, guarding against anyone who might follow. The tunnel stretched deep into the earth, the air growing cooler and mustier with each step. Elena counted her paces, waiting for the right moment. "How much farther?" Dominic demanded. "Not far." "This better not be a trick, Elena." "It's not a trick. I'm giving you exactly what you want." She stopped at a junction where two tunnels branched off in different directions. Ancient support beams lined the walls, wooden and rotting, barely holding back tons of rock. "Here," she said. "He hid it behind that beam." Dominic moved past her, holding up his lantern to examine the beam she'd indicated. His back was to her. His attention was elsewhere. Now, Elena grabbed the lantern and threw it at the support beam with all her strength. The glass shattered. The oil spread. The old dry wood caught fire instantly. Dominic spun around, his face twisted with rage. "What have you done?" "What my father couldn't." Elena backed toward the tunnel entrance. "I'm ending this." When the fire spread faster than she'd expected, racing up the support beam and igniting the ancient timbers around it. The tunnel groaned, a deep, ominous sound that vibrated through the earth. Dominic lunged for her. She dodged, scrambling over rocks and debris. His hand caught her dress, tearing the fabric, but she wrenched free and kept running. Behind her, the ceiling began to collapse. She ran blindly through the darkness, stumbling and falling and picking herself up again. The roar of falling rock filled her ears, drowning out everything else. Dominic's screams, her own heartbeat, the desperate prayer she was whispering over and over. She saw light ahead, the entrance, safety, 10 feet, 5 feet, 2 feet. She burst out of the tunnel just as the entire structure collapsed behind her. The noise was deafening, a thunderous avalanche of stone and earth that seemed to shake the whole world. Dust billowed out of the entrance, choking her, blinding her. Dominic's men stood frozen, staring at the destruction. Then one of them raised his gun. "You killed him. You killed him, you." The shot never came. Instead, there was the sound of hoof beats, dozens of them. And then Caleb was there, riding at the head of what looked like half the men in Silver Ridge. Rio was with him, and Martha Crowley, and a dozen others Elena didn't recognize, but who all carried weapons and looked ready to use them. "Put down your guns," Caleb ordered. "Now." Dominic's men hesitated, then slowly they complied. Caleb was off his horse and at Elena's side in seconds. His hands ran over her, checking for injuries while his eyes searched her face. "You're alive," he breathed. "Thank God, you're alive." "Nathan," she managed. "Dominic shot him. I couldn't. I tried to stop the bleeding, but..." Caleb's face went gray. "Where?" "Behind the jailhouse. Caleb, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." He pressed his forehead to hers, just for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was raw with grief and relief and something that sounded almost like wonder. "You collapsed a mine on Dominic Ashford. I had to stop him by bringing down a mountain on him. It was the only plan I had." Caleb let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "God help me, I love you." "I love you too." She pulled back to look at him. "But Nathan, we have to go to Nathan. He's alive." Lena's heart stopped. "What?" "Martha found him. The bullet missed anything vital. He's at Doc Morrison's right now, cursing a blue streak and demanding whiskey." Caleb's eyes glistened. "He's going to be okay, Elena. He's going to be okay." She collapsed against him, too overwhelmed to speak. Around them, the townspeople secured Dominic's men and began the grim work of excavating the mine entrance. If Dominic had survived, which seemed impossible, they would find him. If he hadn't, they would at least find his body. But Elena didn't care about that anymore. She was safe. Caleb was safe. Nathan was alive. It was over. It was finally over. 3 days passed before they found Dominic's body. The miners who volunteered for the excavation worked around the clock, pulling away rubble piece by piece. When they finally reached him, he was buried under 1,000 pounds of rock, his hands still clutching his pistol, his face frozen in an expression of disbelief. Elena didn't go to see him. She didn't need to. The nightmare was over. But the healing was just beginning. Nathan spent a week at Doc Morrison's clinic complaining about the food and flirting with the nurse until she threatened to sedate him permanently. The bullet had passed clean through his shoulder, missing bone and artery by less than an inch. Luckiest fool in Wyoming, the doctor declared. Another half-inch and we'd be planning a funeral instead of removing stitches. Luck had nothing to do with it, Nathan said with his trademark grin. I'm just too pretty to die. Caleb sat by his brother's bedside every day, their usual bickering replaced by something quieter. Something that looked a lot like gratitude. You almost died for her, Caleb said one afternoon when Elena was down the hall fetching water. I almost died for you, Nathan corrected. You were ready to tear the world apart to save her. I just helped speed things along. That's not... Caleb. Nathan reached out and gripped his brother's hand. I've watched you lock yourself away for 16 years. I've watched you refuse every chance at happiness because you were too scared to risk getting hurt. And then this woman shows up covered in dust and blood and stubborn as a mule, and suddenly you're alive again. He smiled. That's worth a bullet. Hell, that's worth 10 bullets. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. I never said thank you for the ring, for believing in me when I'd stopped believing in myself. You're my brother, that's what brothers do. I know, but still, thank you. Nathan's grin softened into something real. You're welcome. Now go to propose to that woman before she comes to her senses and realizes she can do better. Yeah. Victoria Kane arrived from Denver with news that changed everything. She burst into Martha's boarding house where Caleb and Elena were having dinner, her face flushed with triumph. I found it, she announced. The proof, everything. She spread a stack of documents across the table, birth certificates, death records, letters, financial statements. A paper trail that stretched back 40 years and exposed every lie Dominic Vale had ever told. The real Dominic Ashford died of scarlet fever at age 8, Victoria explained. His death certificate was filed in Boston, but mysteriously disappeared from the archives 10 years ago. I found a copy in a church record that the Ashford family apparently didn't know existed. And Dominic Vale, Caleb asked. Born to a factory worker named Thomas Vale and a maid named Eleanor Vale, except Eleanor's maiden name was Ashford. She was old man Ashford's cousin, which means Dominic was legitimate Ashford blood, just not through the proper channels. Victoria smiled grimly. When the real Dominic died, the old man saw an opportunity to salvage his legacy. He adopted Dominic Vale, changed his name, and raised him as his own son. The only people who knew the truth were the family servants, and most of them were paid off or threatened into silence. What about the legitimate heirs? Elena asked. The real Dominic's sister's children. That's where it gets interesting. Victoria pulled out another document. Dominic's sister, Elizabeth, married a man named Robert Whitmore. They had 2 children before Elizabeth died. Those children, Samuel and Margaret Whitmore, would be the rightful heirs to the Ashford fortune. Elena's blood ran cold. What did you say? Samuel and Margaret Whitmore. They're in their 30s now, living in... Victoria stopped on seeing Elena's face. What is it? My mother's maiden name was Whitmore, Elena whispered. Margaret Whitmore. She died when I was 3. The room went silent. That's not possible, Caleb said slowly. That would mean I'm one of the legitimate heirs. Elena's voice shook. Dominic wasn't just trying to control my father's research. He was trying to eliminate a threat to his inheritance. Victoria's eyes widened. Dear God, he knew. He must have known who you really were. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. That's why he insisted on the engagement, Elena said. That's why he killed my father. If he married me, he could control the threat. If he eliminated my father, he removed the only person who might have connected the dots. But your father never told you, Caleb said. He was protecting me. He must have been protecting me. Tears spilled down Elena's cheeks. All those years he knew who I was, who my mother really was, and he never said a word. Because he knew what Dominic would do if the truth came out. Caleb pulled her into his arms, holding her while she processed the impossible revelation. Her entire life had been built on lies. Not malicious ones, but lies nonetheless. Her father had loved her enough to keep her safe at the cost of her heritage. And Dominic had loved nothing but power and money enough to destroy anyone who threatened them. What happens now? Caleb asked Victoria over Elena's head. Now, Victoria gathered the documents with careful precision. Now we take this to the courts. With Dominic dead and this evidence in hand, the Ashford estate reverts to its rightful heirs. Which means Elena inherits a fortune, Caleb finished. Elena pulled back, wiping her eyes. I don't want it. What? I don't want it. I don't want his money. I don't want anything that came from that family. Her voice was fierce despite the tears. My father spent his whole life trying to escape that legacy. He built something real, something good with his own hands. I'm not going to dishonor that by claiming blood money. Elena, I could what? Buy a mansion, hire servants, become exactly the kind of person Dominic wanted me to be. She shook her head. No, give it to charity. Give it to the workers who suffered in those factories. Give it to anyone who needs it more than I do. But I don't want a single penny. Victoria looked at her with something like admiration. You're certain, twin. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Caleb's arms tightened around her. That's my girl. The legal proceedings took 2 months. Victoria Kane navigated the courts with surgical precision, presenting evidence that demolished every claim Dominic had ever made. The land dispute against Caleb's ranch was thrown out. The theft charges against Elena were dropped. The engagement contract was declared void due to fraud and coercion. And the Ashford fortune, all $40 million of it, was placed in a charitable trust administered by a board that Elena personally selected. The money would fund hospitals, schools, and worker protection programs across the country. You're giving away a kingdom, Nathan observed one afternoon as Elena signed the final documents. I'm building something better, she replied. Something that can't be used to hurt people. Pa would be proud, Caleb said quietly. He always said the measure of a person wasn't what they took, but what they gave. Your father sounds like he was a wise man. He had his moments. The ranch flourished that summer. With the legal troubles behind them, Caleb threw himself into the work with renewed energy. The horses bred strong and healthy. The cattle grew fat on the summer grass. The hands, now including Rio, who had been promoted to assistant foreman, worked with a loyalty born of respect rather than obligation. And Elena worked alongside them. She tended the sick animals and trained the skittish ones, and slowly, day by day, transformed the ranch's modest veterinary operation into something remarkable. Word spread through the territory about the woman doctor who could heal horses that other vets had given up on. Ranchers came from 3 counties to seek her expertise. You're going to put Doc Morrison out of business, Nathan teased her one evening. Doc Morrison only treats humans. I only treat animals. We're not competing. Yet, give it time. The animals like you better than he does. She threw a dish rag at his head. Caleb watched these exchanges with quiet contentment. The ranch house that had been so empty for so long now rang with laughter and arguments and the particular chaos that came from people who genuinely cared about each other. He'd forgotten what that felt like. He'd forgotten a lot of things he realized. How to hope, how to trust, how to let someone see the broken parts of him without fear of judgment. Elena had given all of that back to him. Now it was time to give her something in return. He planned the proposal for weeks. Nathan helped, which meant there was a lot of teasing and a lot of terrible suggestions. What if you spelled out "marry me" with the cattle? No. Too dramatic. Too dramatic, but also impractical. Fine, what about it, Nathan? Yeah. Keep it simple, Caleb said. Elena's not a woman who needs grand gestures. She needs to know I mean it. Do you mean it? More than I've ever meant anything. Then show her that. The rest is just decoration. No. Caleb chose a Sunday evening in late August when the summer heat had finally begun to ease, and the first hints of autumn colored the edges of the world. He led Elena to the spot where they'd first kissed the porch of the ranch house with the sun setting over the mountains in the distance. Caleb, what is this about? Elena asked as he positioned her facing the view. You've been acting strange all day. Have I? You burned breakfast. You put your shirt on inside out. You called Rio by Nathan's name 3 times. Maybe I've just been distracted. By what? By this. He dropped to one knee. Elena's hand flew to her mouth. Elena Whitmore. Caleb began, his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. I spent 16 years believing I would never find someone who saw me for who I really am. I built walls so high I couldn't see over them, and I told myself that was protection when really it was just fear. He pulled out the ring, his mother's ring polished and gleaming in the fading light. Then you showed up with blood on your sleeve and fire in your eyes, and you demolished every wall I'd ever built. You challenged me. You frustrated me. You made me want to be a better man than I ever thought I could be. His voice cracked. You gave me back my hope, Elena. You gave me back my faith in the possibility of something good. Tears streamed down Elena's face, but she didn't look away. She held his gaze with those honey-colored eyes that had captured him from the first moment he saw them. I don't have a fortune to offer you, Caleb continued. I can't give you mansions or servants or the kind of life you were born to have. All I have is this ranch, these horses, and a heart that's been yours since the day we met. He held up the ring. My mother wore this ring for 22 years. My grandmother wore it for 40 before her. It's not worth much in dollars, but it's worth everything to me, and I can't imagine giving it to anyone but you. He took a breath. Elena Whitmore, will you marry me? The silence stretched for 1 heartbeat, 2, 3. Then Elena was on her knees beside him, her hands cupping his face, her lips pressed against his in a kiss that said everything words couldn't express. Yes, she breathed when they finally broke apart. Yes, yes, 1,000 times. Yes. Caleb slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly as if it had been made for her. Maybe it had been. Maybe his mother had known somehow that one day a woman with honey-colored eyes would come along and bring her son back to life. I love you, Caleb said, his voice rough with emotion. I love you too. Elena laughed through her tears. Now stand up before you ruin your good trousers. He stood pulling her up with him, and they stood together on the porch where their story had truly begun. In the distance, Nathan let out a whoop that startled half the horses in the barn. About damn time, he shouted from somewhere behind them. Elena laughed and buried her face in Caleb's chest. How long has he been watching? Probably the whole time. He's not known for subtlety. I noticed. They stood there until the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars emerged in the velvet sky, 2 people who had been broken by life, finding wholeness in each other. The wedding took place on the first Saturday of September. It was nothing like the grand affair Dominic had planned for them. There were no silk flowers imported from Paris, no orchestra from New York, no guest list of politicians and society matrons. Instead, there was the little church in Silver Ridge filled with ranch hands and townspeople, and anyone who wanted to witness the impossible. Caleb Sterling, the stone-hearted bachelor, finally taking a bride. Reverend Thomas presided over the ceremony. He was 60 years old, white-haired and kind-eyed, and he had known Caleb since the day he was born. I've been waiting for this moment for 16 years, he told Caleb before the ceremony. Your mother asked me to pray for you, before she died. She asked me to pray that you'd find someone who could see past your walls. Did you You saw every Sunday without fail. The Reverend smiled. Seems like God was listening after all. Elena walked down the aisle on Nathan's arm since she had no father to give her away. She wore a simple white dress that Martha Crowley had altered from her own wedding gown, and she carried wildflowers that the ranch hands had gathered from the meadow that morning. She had never looked more beautiful. Caleb felt his throat tighten as she approached. This woman, this fierce, brilliant, stubborn woman, had chosen him. Out of all the possibilities in the world, she had chosen to spend her life with a broken rancher who had forgotten how to love. He would spend the rest of his days making sure she never regretted that choice. The vows they exchanged were traditional, spoken in the small church, with the summer sun streaming through the windows. But when the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, and Caleb kissed his bride for the first time as her husband, the cheers that erupted from the congregation were anything but traditional. Rio was crying openly. Martha Crowley was dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. Even Victoria Kane, who had traveled all the way from Denver for the occasion, looked suspiciously misty. And Nathan was grinning so wide it looked like his face might split in two. "Took you long enough," he said when Caleb and Elena made their way back down the aisle. "Some things are worth waiting for," Caleb replied. "Yeah." Nathan's voice softened. "Yeah, they are." Says the reception was held at the ranch with tables set up in the yard and lanterns strung between the fence posts. There was food and music and dancing that lasted until well past midnight. Caleb and Elena danced their first dance to a fiddle tune that one of the ranch hands played swaying together under the stars. "Mrs. Sterling," Caleb murmured against her hair. "Mr. Sterling," she replied. "That's going to take some getting used to." "We have time." She looked up at him, her eyes bright with joy. "We have all the time in the world." And they did. 5 years later, the years that followed were everything Caleb had never dared to hope for. Their first child came the following summer, a daughter with her mother's honey-colored eyes and her father's stubborn jaw. They named her Eleanor after Elena's grandmother, and she was spoiled rotten by everyone on the ranch from the moment she drew her first breath. "She's going to be trouble," Nathan predicted, watching the infant wrap her tiny fingers around his thumb. "She's going to be magnificent," Elena corrected. 2 more children followed, a son named Thomas after Elena's father, who inherited Caleb's love of horses and could ride before he could properly walk, and another daughter, Victoria, named after the lawyer who had helped them win their freedom. She had her mother's quick mind and her father's quiet intensity. The ranch continued to grow. Caleb expanded the horse breeding operation, focusing on quality over quantity, and soon Sterling horses were sought after across the entire Western Territory. Elena established a proper veterinary practice, training young people who came from as far as California to learn from her. And every evening when the work was done and the children were sleeping, Caleb and Elena sat on the porch together and watched the sun set over the mountains. "Do you ever regret it?" Caleb asked one night many years after they'd first met. Elena looked at him, her face softened by age, but no less beautiful. "Regret what?" "Giving away the fortune. You could have had everything, mansions, servants, a life of ease." "I do have everything." She reached over and took his hand. "I have you. I have our children. I have a home filled with love and purpose and meaning." She smiled. "What could $40 million give me that I don't already have? A house that doesn't need a new roof every 5 years." She laughed, that full, rich laugh that still made his heart skip after all this time. "The roof gives you something to complain about. You'd be bored without it." "I would never be bored with you." Flatterer. Truth teller. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the last light fade from the sky. Nathan had married to eventually a schoolteacher from Denver who could match his wit word for word. They had 4 children of their own and lived in a house just over the hill, close enough for Sunday dinners and far enough for privacy. "Never thought I'd see the day," Caleb said when Nathan announced his engagement. "The eternal bachelor settling down." "Had to keep up with my big brother," Nathan replied. "Can't let you have all the happiness." Martha Crowley lived to be 93 years old, and when she passed, half the town turned out for her funeral. She had been a mother figure to more people than anyone could count, and her boarding house became a memorial in her honor, a place where women fleeing dangerous situations could find safety and support. Elena funded it from the profits of her veterinary practice. It was called Crowley House, and over the years, it helped hundreds of women start new lives. "Martha would be proud," Caleb told her after the dedication ceremony. "Martha would say, 'I'm being too sentimental and that there's work to be done,'" Elena replied. "That too." The children grew up strong and kind and brave. Eleanor married a lawyer from Boston and spent her life fighting for workers' rights, carrying on the legacy of the charitable trust her mother had established. Thomas took over the horse breeding operation when Caleb finally admitted he was getting too old to manage it alone. Victoria became a doctor, a real doctor with credentials and everything, and opened a clinic in Silver Ridge that served anyone who needed care regardless of their ability to pay. "They're all so much better than we were at their age," Caleb observed one day watching his grandchildren play in the yard. They had better examples, Elena said. They had you. I was just the stubborn woman who came with the property. You were never just anything. On the 50th anniversary of their wedding, the entire family gathered at the ranch. There were so many people now, children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, friends and neighbors, and people who had become family through years of shared work and shared joy. Tables stretched across the yard laden with food that had been prepared for days. Music filled the air. Children ran laughing through the grouse while their parents called after them to slow down. Be careful, watch where you're going. Caleb stood on the porch watching it all and felt his eyes burn with tears he didn't try to hide. Elena came to stand beside him, her hand finding his with the ease of 50 years of practice. What are you thinking about? She asked. The day I threw my mother's ring in the dirt, he said quietly. I was so certain I would never find anyone who loved me for myself. So certain that I was destined to be alone. And now. He looked at the chaos of people in his yard, at the children who bore his name and his blood, at the woman who had walked into his life with nothing but a trunk and a stubborn refusal to give up. Now I know that the best things in life are the ones we never see coming. He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. You saved me, Elena, not just from loneliness or fear, but from myself. You showed me that it was possible to be seen and loved and accepted, walls and all. You gave me a family when I'd given up on ever having one. You saved me too, she said softly. You gave me a home when I had nowhere to go. You stood between me and every danger without ever asking for anything in return. You loved me when I didn't know how to let myself be loved. Seems like we saved each other. Seems like we did. He kissed her, then slow and sweet, and somewhere behind them, their youngest great-grandchild squealed with delighted disgust. Gross, the child announced. Great-grandma and great-grandpa are being mushy again. Get used to it, kid, Nathan's voice called out. They've been like that for 50 years. Ain't going to stop now. Laughter rippled through the gathering. Caleb smiled against Elena's lips. I love you, he said. I love you too, she replied. And that was the truth of it. After everything, the pain and the fear and the years of running the enemies and the friends and the battles won and lost, love was what remained. Love was what had saved them. Love was what had built this family from two broken people who had found in each other the missing pieces they'd stopped searching for. That evening, as the party wound down and the guests began to leave, Caleb and Elena sat on the porch one last time. The sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of gold and rose and purple. The ranch stretched out before them, prosperous and peaceful, filled with the evidence of a life well lived. No regrets, Elena asked. Not a single one. Me neither. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her, holding her close. 50 years ago, he had been a man with a heart of stone and a future of nothing but emptiness. Then she had arrived, a woman with blood on her sleeve and fire in her eyes, carrying nothing but a trunk and a determination to survive. She had brought him back to life. She had given him everything. And now, sitting on this porch in the golden light of sunset, surrounded by the family they had built together, Caleb Sterling finally understood what his mother had known all those years ago. Some things are worth waiting for. Some people are worth fighting for. And love, real love, the kind that sees past walls and heals old wounds and builds something beautiful from broken pieces, love is always worth the risk. He had refused every woman in the country. He had waited without knowing he was waiting. And she had arrived exactly when she was meant to, carrying nothing but a trunk and a heart brave enough to love a man who had forgotten how to let himself be loved. This was their story. Not a story of grand gestures and sweeping romance, but of patience and healing, and two broken people who found in each other the missing pieces they had stopped searching for. It was in the end a love story. The best kind, the kind that lasts.